Thank you, thank you. Lovely. Welcome. And you're right, Sina, it feels like a very long time. Fortunately, had a slight emergency last month. So good to be here and be with you all. It's yeah, wonderful. So I always try to kind of talk about something that's been coming up a lot during this week or leading up to doing this kind of session. And a topic that's been coming up over and over again is questions along the line of how do I surrender? You know, what is surrender, and how do I actually do that as a separate, you know, from the separate self into the universal cosmic self. So I hoped it might be useful to discuss that this evening, because it's perhaps one of the most frustrating parts of our awakening, or at least it was in my journey, the recognition that I'm not a separate being, but the sense energetically that there's still very much a seeking going on, which is really seeming to disturb me, and knowing inside that this seeking activity is actually getting in the way of peace, that it's actually something that needs to be surrendered, let go of, disidentified with. But the actual mechanics of how we do that, because how do I actually surrender? How do I let go of my ideas about myself if anything I try to do is really reinforcing this sense of separation? So if you've ever found yourself in that situation, it was enormously, well, a very desperate time for me in my own awakening, very dark and desperate time, when I realized this separate being isn't really true. But I couldn't seem to stop fueling the thought stream, stop fueling the seeking somehow. I had read about surrender and heard a lot of great teachers speak about it. And anything that I tried to surrender, anything I tried to let go of, just seemed to make me feel worse, because it emphasized this sense that there's a doer here. There's someone letting go of something. So it became a very, very difficult point in my own awakening. And at that point, we've gone too far to kind of stay asleep. We're already half awake, more than half awake. We've seen, or at least intellectually know, that we're not a separate being. And that this seekingness to try to get to awakening is actually getting in the way of our peace, disturbing our peace. That when this separateness dissolves or merges back into the self, or whatever we want to call it, into the awareness, the consciousness, then there is only peace. So how do we go about making that happen? Can we do anything if that separate being is only an illusion? And it took me a lot of time to really come to understand that the only thing I could do was to keep seeing. So I really wanted to kind of talk about that and how that unfolded for me, because hopefully that is useful. I began, when I first realized that all of my thoughts weren't true, I began to try to let them go. And, you know, thoughts about unworthiness and thoughts about awakening and thoughts about everything, really. I began to really set about letting them go. And after a while, I realized that I was trying as really, really, really hard to let go of everything, which is absolutely a total paradox and completely impossible. The more I tried to let go of my mind and my thoughts, it just began to make it noisier. And if you've ever experienced that, the moment you try to get away from anything spiritually, it seems to be kind of stuck to you with Velcro or something. And the moment you try to get some distance from your mind, the more active it seems to become. So again, we're emphasizing, without meaning to, of course, that there is someone here that can do some activity that's going to lead to awakening, some kind of practice. And in the end, for me, it just became clearer and clearer that anything I tried to do to surrender began to make me feel disturbed. Anything I tried to do to merge into the great awareness, to get rid of this separateness and come back to wholeness, even, was just emphasizing that energetically that there's something here to get rid of. And began to realize that I am actually that powerful, as we all are, that if I believe even that there's something to be gotten rid of or merge back into the one being, the awareness, as we've been calling it, that I would really keep experiencing that. And I felt, as I began to recognize this, horribly trapped. I felt like I just had to wait for this seekingness to kind of fizzle out on its own out of sheer desperation and despair. And also exhaustion, from trying and really, really not succeeding. In fact, feeling further away from peace than I've ever been in my entire life. So I began to try a different tack. Maybe the only way to surrender and to stop sustaining this sense of separation was really to keep confirming to myself that there was actually no separate being here to do any spiritual activity, that the practice that was being done has always been done by the awareness. And it sounds strange that the great awareness, pure awareness, might need to meditate or self-inquire, but when it takes the shape of a human being, it tends to get all kinds of crazy ideas about itself, that it somehow left the awareness and then has to come back, somehow has to release all these ideas of separation. But if you're at that point where anything you're doing is making it worse, then it's probably going to help to just switch over to seeing. So seeing through self-inquiry, actually looking and trying to find a separate being or someone who's looking at the awareness. Is there really a someone? When you get right down to it, is there an entity, a person, a separate being here, right where your body is, that's actually doing this practice? And for me, it was a powerful combination of, as Doreen was just saying before I started, that turning away from this separate self and turning towards what was actually real, what still is real, that which is everywhere at all times, this pure awareness, is the only way to surrender. Everything else that we do is going to be emphasizing that there is, in fact, someone here, a separate being that has a volitional will. And of course, our mind isn't really going to like that, because it says, well, if I don't have any free will, I can't really do anything to move towards awakening. But again, this kind of objection is coming from an imaginary separate self. And that imaginary separate self isn't actually there, but we kind of keep recreating it and sustaining it without realizing. So I thought it would be good to kind of do some inquiry here this evening and or this afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are, and really look and see and prove to ourselves. Turning away from the separate self doesn't mean rejecting it. It doesn't mean pushing against it. It doesn't mean trying to get rid of it. It doesn't mean trying to merge it into the self either. And I'm saying that because I wasted a lot of time trying to get rid of something that wasn't there. And that seemed like a really good idea for a very long time. So looking and not finding a separate self, and then as a result of that, what we actually do find is the awareness, the pure awareness. So turning away from the separate self and turning towards our true self actually ends up being the same thing, putting attention on what's actually real and stable and unchanging and can be experienced and proved, and experiencing that we can't actually find a separate being when we look. You begin to find automatically that this kind of surrender begins to happen, because it's very hard to believe so much in the desires and the passions and the convictions of this separate self when you keep finding you can't find it. And for me, that was the only thing that really began to override this freight train, huge momentum of kind of seekingness that was going on. Every time I looked and didn't find a separate being, it took a little bit more wind out of the sails. And I must have done this 1,000 times at least, just to kind of, not all in one day, of course, over a period of time. And it became a labor of love to look and not find. Became, at first, it was a very shocking thing that the person that I thought I was, that my whole life was based around, and even my whole awakening, this entity that was trying to get back towards its source, was discovered to be absent without leave and nowhere to be found. That was really shocking and a little bit frightening at first. Also, a massive relief when that began to sink in. What does that actually mean then? That means if there isn't a separate entity to move towards awakening, a someone, or to move towards anything, in fact, or away from anything, that yes, there's nothing I can do as a separate being to get to awakening, but that also means there's nothing I can do as a separate being to screw it up and to get in the way and to resist it and to slow it down or to get it wrong and all the other things that our mind is doubting. Or if there isn't a separate being, to be not worthy enough or not ready enough or not ripe enough, or there isn't a separate being that actually needs to read one more book or attend one more satsang or whatever thing we're kind of holding inside as a reason why it's not happening for us. So looking and not finding, let's do that right now. What you call you, and I'm not talking about your body. You say your body because you know intuitively it's not you. It's something that you're using. I'm using this body right now, and it's very helpful. Using my senses right now. And we also say my mind, my thoughts, they're also not me. Even my emotions, I won't even claim them as me. They're mine, but they're not me. So I'd invite you with me if you'd like to look with me and be willing to be surprised and shocked. Can you actually find someone when you look? When we look at what you really are, when we ask this question and we kind of search our beingness, can we find a separate entity? A person? Can we find a seeker that's moving towards something? And this might be a different way to look than we have done before. We might have tended to only think about ourselves, but we're really kind of searching what I call me, because it feels like, if we don't investigate, it really feels like there's someone here trying to get towards the truth. There's someone here trying to surrender, or whatever it is that we're currently seemingly in a process of. So just looking now with me. When I look, I find a body. I can hear it saying these words. I can see that my senses are working in the body. Any thoughts and emotions moving, I can also perceive those. there's any energy flowing through the body or any aches and pains, anything like that, I can perceive that. I'm aware of it. What really am I if I'm watching all of this? Where am I? What am I made of? Am I a perceivable thing? Am I small and limited? Just being willing to look like this and being willing to find something different than what we might expect is really actual surrender in itself. I'm willing to be wrong about what I actually am. I've always imagined myself to be an entity, a separate being, a someone, a particular being living inside this body. Can I actually find that when I look? Where am I actually? And where aren't I? Am I inside or outside of my body? Or do those not really apply? Am I an object? Do I have a size and a shape? Is there anything definable about you at all? We can define our bodies. Well, I am this tall and my body is this old and it weighs this much and it looks like this and it does that and it likes to eat this. But what about you? How tall are you? Do you have an age? Can you find a location? And perhaps just as important, if you can't really find a someone with a definable boundary, if you can't find this separate entity, it feels like it's there. It seems like it's there. And when we actually look, what do we find instead? For me, the first time I did this, I found this kind of blank, empty nothingness, which was really quite surprising. It wasn't a thing at all. Where I expected to find a person called Helen, there was just this nothingness, this emptiness. And it didn't feel amazing. It certainly wasn't blissful. In fact, it was quite boring the first time, quite dull. And very shocking in that there wasn't anybody at home in this house. The lights were on and it was, stuff going on inside, but there was nobody living in this body. Just taking a moment to get used to that may be very different to what we have imagined ourselves to be for so long. But it is also what is actually real. That I am not really an object at all. I can't really perceive myself in the same way I would perceive a thought or a table or an emotion. Again, just looking with me, searching again. We can't do this too many times. Searching your beingness, searching yourself. Can you find a separate person? And over doing this again and again, it just becomes clearer that it's never been there. That all of this seekingness and this separation and this suffering has been held together by this assumption that once we go with it, it takes on a life of its own. This assumption that there is someone here, an entity, a separate being, a person that is running the body and deciding and doing and all of that. So what do you find? Is it just blank, inert emptiness? Well, can it really be just blank and inert? It may feel that way at first, of course, as it did for me. But I noticed it was aware, this empty nothingness that I found. And you can check this out yourself. It was what all my senses are reporting to. It knows what my eyes are seeing. When I say, I know what my eyes are seeing, this eye that's watching the senses and watching the mind is something very different to what we have imagined before. Just getting used to it, experiencing it. And it may feel a little uncomfortable that you can't actually define yourself. But every time we come to experience this emptiness, this nothingness, you begin to understand it more, to get used to it. It is not, in fact, inert and boring. It is actually very aware, isn't it? It's actually full of life. Excuse me. Just checking out with me again one more time. What do you find when you look for you? How far does it reach, this nothingness, this alert nothingness? And is it determined and defined by concepts such as inside or outside? Is it going to grow old and change, this alert nothingness? Is it really mine or yours? If we imagine somehow we were all sitting, all of our bodies were sitting in the same room together, would there be lots of these alert nothingnesses, emptinesses, or would it just be one in which all of these bodies were appearing? Could you divide this alert nothingness? Could you split it into two even? Is that even possible? So just looking and not finding this separate being and really making friends with what does appear, what does show itself. Recognizing that we may have some ideas about this alert nothingness when we first experience it. We've been taught to value things and things that come and go and move and change. And we might automatically label this nothingness as unimportant or not really relevant. And therefore we experience it as just this, nothing special. But what is it really? What does it mean if you find this alert nothingness when you look for yourself? If we searched our beingness and looked for ourself and found this, and this is you. This is what you really are before form and before change and before time and before duality, before any ideas of separation and merging and union. this is what you are. And all of that comes later when you form yourself into the shape of a human being. But before all of that, here you are as this empty nothingness that's just watching, just observing, perceiving. Right now, you know if your mind is talking or quiet. Right now, you know what your senses are taking in. You're hearing these words. You know how your body feels, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable, hungry, tired, cold, hot. All of that's just reporting back to this empty nothingness, this alertness. This is you without a shape. You before you play with forms. And it's not at all how we're taught to define ourselves, is it? Because every single problem we have as a human being, and every single one, even this greatest problem of how do I get back to the formless, empty nothingness, every single problem falls away here. There is nothing here yet. There's not even duality here yet. There's not even one or two. There's just this alert emptiness. So just checking this out and experiencing yourself as this, keeping your attention on this as much as you can until it begins to feel more like you than the egoic sense of self does, than the separate sense of self. And this surrender begins to happen then automatically. It becomes clear that mind is just talking inside this alert emptiness, and it's not talking to anyone in particular. You used to think it was talking to me, but it cannot really be talking to me as this alert emptiness. It's just talking. Talking, trying to solve the problems that existed when I thought I was this separate being, this someone. Even the spiritual problems of how do I merge back into this? And isn't surrender really, couldn't we really define it as being willing to put more attention on this before all problems arise, than putting attention on my spiritual issues of how to get there and why I'm not there yet and all of that. Even the problems that I experience this emptiness and then it seems to go. How do I get back to it? Even that one, does that apply to the alert nothingness, the emptiness? And there's less and less interest in these problems of the mind for me when I began to reside here, bringing attention to this. The place before anything can even be suggested to be wrong. To bring in some attention here on a regular basis, as much as you want to and you can. It begins to become clear that there is this illusionary world where I am a separate being. I have a lot of problems to fix before I can wake up. And I might never wake up in that place. And then there is this formless emptiness this conscious alertness that doesn't have a shape, that's also called me. And I could spend another lifetime or 10 lifetimes as this illusionary separate self trying to get back to this, and it will always be here. Or I can make a decision to devote as much time and attention to this, to wanting to get to know this alert emptiness. It may seem strange to say to want to get to know it when you can't really describe it or define it, but it has so much fullness in it. It is you. Doesn't it make sense to get to know this, to want to know this more than you've wanted anything? What's it like to have no concepts about yourself? What's that like? To have no ground to stand on, to continuously kind of bring attention away from the next problem that's suggested by our mind and back to this as a applied, consistent form of surrender. If I chase that problem, it will get bigger and I'll seem to be further away from this emptiness, this nothingness. Just resting here. And this is too simple here for our mind. It doesn't like it because there is no way then for it to find an issue or to continue to feel unworthy. And eventually it stops talking. But only when it doesn't matter. That's the surrender, when it doesn't matter whether the mind is talking because it's just talking inside a head that's happening inside this alert nothingness. When it's no longer talking to you, or more correctly, when I realize it's never been talking to me. It's been talking to this imaginary someone. Maybe mind is this imaginary someone. Just happening inside the space of my being. So just checking out one more time, what do you actually find when you look for yourself? When I don't think about myself, what do I actually experience? To me, this became my definition of surrender. This became my my way of seeing replaced the need to do something, to get somewhere. Just to reaffirm as many times as is necessary that there isn't anyone here to get anywhere. And that what actually is here is the place I'm already trying to get to. It's already here. So I hope that you at least had some experience of something different in that. And I would love to talk to you about it if you have any questions or challenges with that inquiry that we just did. Or if there's some experience you want to share, or a challenge you're having right now in your awakening, feel free to either raise your hand or just speak up. We'll see. We have some time left. If anyone has anything on their mind, Michelle?
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, good. I just was going to ask, like when I do the, I've been sitting in silence like daily, and I've been doing like some of your guided meditations, but I was just wondering, like, when you're inquiring, are you just kind of doing that as the questions come up? Like this was an example today, which I appreciate. But I feel like I don't know if it's just the ego or whatever, it's just trying to be like, well, what should you be doing? And then I don't really know like how to not fall into that trap, but also I want to be consistent, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And it does make sense, and it's a good question. And for me, I obsessed a lot over this, as you can probably tell. Am I doing the right practice, and how do I go about doing that in a way that's going to consistently dissolve this sense of separation and achieve the surrenders we're just talking about? And I began to kind of realize that any practice I'm doing, as long as it is a kind of a direct practice, like especially like we've done today, meditation, looking directly at, putting attention on what is real, that it doesn't matter really how we're approaching that. We might come to that through a contemplative question, or we might come to that through just listening to silence, meditation, or we might do some self-inquiry like we've done today with a question, what am I, who am I, where am I? It really is all the same thing, isn't it? It's taken me back to my natural state of emptiness. And perhaps sometimes I might feel in the mood more for meditation, sometimes more for self-inquiry. You probably notice that yourself, right? Sometimes you just really want to sit and be quiet. And then sometimes there's a burning question that really wants to kind of come to the forefront.
That makes sense. Thanks. Yeah, and I feel like even just the sitting in silence has caused a shift, and it's kind of funny how you immediately are like, oh, I'm not doing enough, but that was the whole point. You're not supposed to be doing. So thank you.
Yeah. The seekingness falls away bit by bit, but when it does pop its head back up again, it says, I'm not doing anything. I'm just being in silence. I'm not doing enough, and then it would fall away again for another day or so, and then it'll pop back up and say, I'm dropping my practice. I don't know what's going on, so it took me a while to realize that those sort of quiet and effortless periods in between, because the seeker was just absent in that time. When it came back, it had a little panic. Oh, where was I? Something like that.
Get that.
Lovely. Thanks. Anish. Hi.
Hi, Helen. I think for the longest time, and we read a lot about grace, right, in spiritual texts and old teachings from the East especially.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be very gentle when I say this. I had a lot of objection with grace because I felt like I have no control over grace. It'll come when it comes. I just sit here waiting, not having any control over when or if I will awaken, so to speak. But I think you've clarified that today, right? This separate self that is worrying is never going to awaken, right?
Yeah. It was so, I hated the word grace for so long because it made me feel disempowered completely. And I couldn't stand that. It was worse than fingernails down a chalkboard. It was like, there's nothing I can do. But eventually I realized that I am that grace I've been looking for. But the separate self, as you said, it's just never going to really understand that. It's never going to get that, is it? It's always going to be trying to move towards it or trying to get grace to come in or something like that. Yeah. But to me, it just became another word for the self. Grace, awareness, same thing. But if I call it something and I imagine it's outside of me, outside of my control, it will be a horrible feeling. I waste a lot of time that way as well.
And as a follow-up, if I may, when you point to the separate self not existing by itself, and in these beautiful meditations, I'm able to experience that. But in my case, there's a lot of forgetting, meaning every morning I wake up, it's like Groundhog Day. I have to sit in, actually, before I jump into the day, I have to literally remind myself as to who am I? Where are the teachings? How do I actually live this day?
Yeah.
Because I tend to fall back into being a separate self again.
And here's a really crazy question. Does that matter? If I've seen, and I know it seems to matter, and I just for sake of explanation, if I've seen enough times that that separate self isn't there when I look for it, does it really matter if it seems to be there and if I seem to identify with it? Really, what it's made of is energy and thoughts and emotions, isn't it? A separate self. It's a kind of energetic mass of thoughts and the resulting emotions, and attention going to that makes it seem real. But is anything different for me if I spend the whole day completely identified as a separate being, listening to my mind, feeling all kinds of negative emotions, and then as I get into bed at night, I go, wait a minute, that wasn't real at all. Our ego would say something happened there, something went wrong, and I have to stop that occurring because it doesn't feel good. When I identify as a separate being, it doesn't feel good. But actually, if it's something much simpler than that, then I don't have to get rid of that. I just have to realize that it makes no difference to what I actually am. At any point during the day, I could stop you and have a conversation with you, and sometimes you might really be noticing the emptiness. Some other times you might be lost in thoughts and feel terrible. Are you actually any different when that happens ever? Are you actually ever not this emptiness? And there's a smile, yeah, a big smile. And then when you get that, you stop trying to get rid of this identification, really it's attention that looks at mind again. That's what when we say I'm identified as a separate self, what really is occurring there is attention has just gone back to thoughts. Then we say, oh, I came out of it again. Well, attention went back to the self, to you, the real you. Nothing's actually occurring to you in that, is it? You're watching your attention go this way. You feel terrible, go outwards to thoughts and experiences, and then come back in here to look at you, the real you, the emptiness. You feel really, really good and peaceful and happy. And then it goes, the body mind feels that way, and then it goes back out again. The body feels terrible and contracted. Is anything happening to you in that?
I'm just the same. I mean, it just is the way it is. It's always been.
And perfect. And when that really hits home, you won't care. You really won't care where attention is or what the mind's doing. It won't mean anything in that same way. And then somehow attention just kind of stays here most of the time. It goes to look at mind when it needs to, when you need to sort something out or do some task, and then it straight back to the self out of habit. Most of us spend all of our energy trying to stop this kind of backwards and forwards going on. And it's impossible. What happens if you stop trying? As the awareness, as the alert emptiness, can you do anything about where your attention is really? And do you need to?
That's the simplest thing that paradoxically seems to be the hardest thing for me, not doing anything, not making it matter, so to speak.
Yeah. Is it you that thinks it matters now? You've given yourself a job to do here that isn't yours. You think you need to disidentify with it. So much simpler than even that, isn't it? This is the last job you give yourself that isn't yours. How do I stop doing that? Well, are you doing that in the first place? Even that?
I'm not really doing it. I am kind of assuming I'm doing it, so to speak.
Yeah. And this is where we just hold on to kind of wanting to be someone, just that last thread of wanting to be someone that's in the process getting towards. But is this true for you? Even this? Do I even have to stop this identification and disidentification I'm free and I'm bound, and I'm free and I'm bound. And how do I stop that occurring? You can't, because it's not happening to you.
Yeah.
It's just a very old habit, isn't it?
That also slightly or completely dissolves the concept of guilt. I was going to ask you about that as well.
Yeah.
Guilt of past actions, my actions, and whose actions, and
There's just the
creating
body, and there's karmic patterns playing out through that body, but they don't belong to anyone. So how could you have any guilt when the actions are just occurring spontaneously? It just knocks it right out of the water, doesn't it?
that actually gives meaning to the words God's will, right? I mean, we say it, but now it actually has some meaning because it's just the way things played out.
Yeah, thy will be done is all that's ever been possible, not my will. Thy will is all that's going on here, isn't it? And the last bit of my will is I'm trying to get back to God's will, and there's nothing that this me can do to get there, is there? Nothing at all. And eventually the self or God just kind of goes, you know what, I'm just going to drop that. That's kind of boring now. Frustrating. Wonderful.
Thank
Wow.
you, Helen.
Powerful conversation, huh?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Anyone else like to share? Shauna?
Hi, Helen. Thank you so
Hi.
much. My experience was the sensations in the body felt so real. They feel so real. And as I focused on the non-entity of that person and just became aware of the awareness, and as you said, like this, the aliveness, and it's, for me, it's illuminated and very alert. As I spent time just focusing on that, that became primary. The body sensations became very, very secondary, to where all I was aware of was this beautifully lit up, alive awareness. So that was my experience. Thank you.
Wow. Wonderful. It's it flips around, doesn't it? When my attention is on phenomena, the body, the mind, the seeker, the seekingness, that seems very, very real. And then the awareness seems secondary. When I look directly like this, it flips over, like you said, and you really begin to see just how powerful you are then, that whatever you put your focus on is really going to make a difference. You know, it's going to, just the looking at the seekingness sustains it, you know, that sense of separation. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Does anyone like to share their experience during the inquiry? Or
Mary has her hand up.
oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
I just want to express that I'm feeling such immense gratitude at the moment. It's just come so suddenly, almost out of nowhere, after a long time of carrying so many heavy grievances and just having this simple willingness for them to go seemed to do it. And it's like I'm watching this and I can hardly, well, I can believe it because it's here. But the joy that is coming with the simplicity of not being that person that I thought I was, and that may come back and forwards, I don't know. I don't know what will happen next, but it's like a real excitement as well that I didn't expect at all, because it's nothing and it's simple and it's just a field. It's just like being in this wide open, shining field, and peace after so many years of not peace.
Yeah.
And I've been reading your books, and watching your YouTubes for the last week or so, and I'm so grateful for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to hear as well that you're finding some pieces. It's just such a relief, isn't it, that it's not a process. It's just utter simplicity. This is here, and this is really what I am, and that just becomes clearer and clearer. And I think I just sobbed with relief when I first, after the shock and the fear, just like, wow, this is just so different.
Yeah.
But also very natural, isn't it? It's easy to just kind of fall into it. And
It's
you're right,
always,
probably
yeah.
mind will come back again at some point and, you know, try to get you to play with it. But this, just keep seeing this as often as you can, you know, just keep diving into it. And you probably feel it's changing something inside the mind and body anyway, something softening and relaxing. And
yes.
yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate that. Lovely to talk to you.
You too.
Thank you. Shall we, let's just spend a few minutes being quiet, shall we? Shall we dive back into that we have about 5 minutes. It might be nice to finish that way. Let's just take a moment just to, actually, let's do some listening. Let's just listen and see what we can hear. So right now, I can hear these words. There's also kind of silence in between them. I can hear my heart beating. I can hear my breathing. And whatever you're hearing right now, whatever you're listening to, as well as these words, it's just ask this question gently. What else can I hear? Begin to become aware of sounds inside and outside. And the silence in which they're happening. Just listening. Can you hear the listening itself? Listening is just happening. Whatever sound occurs, the listening is already there. Constant and effortless. Open and free. Thank you very much. Namaste. And I'll hand the mic back to Sina. Thank you.